Hi, and welcome to the 700 Club. From Hezbollah in Lebanon to Hamas in Gaza, along with militia in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. It's no secret Iran has a vast terror network across the Middle East, and it's driven by hatred of the U.S. and Israel.
Well, now the regime could be expanding its reach by cashing in on a strategic partnership decades in the making. The key player is likely al-Qaeda's next leader. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has the details.
The U.S. drone strike that eliminated al-Qaeda's Ayman al-Zawahiri could also have put into motion an even more dangerous phase in the global war on terror, one with Iran at the helm.
One might not expect that the world's leading state-sponsored terrorism that's a Shia revolutionary regime would partner with a Sunni terrorist group. These are oil and water, you might think. But in actuality, there is a very close relationship between these two.
Iran's connection to al-Qaeda dates back to the early 1990s, when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard helped Osama bin Laden run jihadist training camps in Sudan. The regime also offered safe haven to al-Qaeda leadership fleeing Afghanistan in the wake of 9/11. Saif al-Adil, a face on the FBI's first list of most wanted terrorists, was among those protected.
Saif al-Adil is next in line to be leader of al-Qaeda. He's the crown prince of al-Qaeda, if you will. Now, there's no guarantee that al-Qaeda leadership is actually going to tap him, but that's the smart bet. And Saif al-Adil has been living the al-Qaeda life in Iran for many years.
There's concern Iran will now seek to take advantage of that relationship, bringing al-Qaeda into the fold as another proxy to do the regime's dirty work.
Al-Qaeda and Iran have common enemies. They both hate the United States. They both hate Israel. They both hate Saudi Arabia and the other Sunni Gulf monarchies. If al-Qaeda is mounting terrorist attacks against all or any of those organizations, that advances Iran's strategic objectives, and it does so in a way that's deniable.
Nathan Sales, former ambassador at large and coordinator for counterterrorism under the Trump administration, says the wild card in how this will all play out is Afghanistan.
Now that the Taliban is back in business of providing safe haven to senior al-Qaeda figures, as we saw with Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was living in the heart of downtown Kabul, presumably under Taliban protection, does that mean that other al-Qaeda leaders likewise are going to relocate themselves and their families into the safe haven of Afghanistan under Taliban control?
If that happens, Sales tells CBN News it could change the relationship between al-Qaeda and Iran. Other experts warn it could also result in a sort of three-way unholy alliance.
They're not identical ideologically. They come from very distinct backgrounds, but they're willing to put their differences aside when it comes to their hatred towards the West broadly and America specifically.
Gabriel Nerona, former Iran advisor for the State Department, says no matter how this plays out, the U.S. needs a proactive approach.
I think we have to really up our counterterrorism strike capability. We need to work with local partners, have intelligence on the ground so we can identify these threats and take them out early. And then I think the big thing is money. Money is the sinews of war. If you don't have money, you can't do a whole lot. I think we need to get a lot more serious about our sanctions.
Since President Biden took office, there's been a clear pivot away from counterterrorism efforts towards the threat posed by China. While both Nerona and Ambassador Sales agree that's important, they warn we can't afford to become complacent in the Middle East. Andrew?
Well, Caitlin, we recently learned Iran plotted to kill two former members of the Trump administration, of course, National Security Advisor John Bolton and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. This month, an Iranian man stabbed author Salman Rushdie in New York State. Do security officials believe Iran is building its own terror network here in the U.S.?
The experts I spoke to definitely agree that Iran has some sort of operational capacity here. And there's speculation that they could be trying to build some sort of online terror network. With that Rushdie attack, there's evidence that the suspect was in communication with members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And in that plot against former American officials, there's once again proof that an IRGC member was communicating with Americans via social media about carrying out that attack. Now, Nerona and Ambassador Sales say a plot against the U.S. is happening right now, and it could come from within the United States.
Caitlin, in your report, you mentioned intelligence agencies turning their attention to China. So what about the concern we're taking our eye off the ball in terms of global terrorism now?
The experts I spoke with, as I mentioned, they believe that China does need to be a priority. But senior military officials recently testified before Senate that we're 8 months away from a major attack on America. That was 4 months ago. So that puts an attack by the end of the year. And if that does happen, our priorities would immediately switch back to counterterrorism efforts. So experts say let's pay attention to what's going on now in the Middle East so that we're not just reacting when something terrible happens.
Yeah, an awful lot to be needing to pay attention to. Caitlin, we appreciate your reporting. Thanks for being with us. In other news, the head of the Centers for Disease Control admits the agency failed in its response to the COVID pandemic. Ephraim Graham has that story and more from the CBN Newsroom. Ephraim?
Andrew, Dr. Rochelle Walensky is calling for a major reset at the agency in response to an internal report. The review calls the CDC's guidance on masks, vaccines, and other information confusing and overwhelming, and describes its website as difficult to navigate. Walensky will now oversee a reorganization that includes internal staff changes to help the agency respond more quickly and make information easier to understand. Meanwhile, a new round of COVID-19 shots could be available in a matter of weeks. The upgraded booster would target the original COVID strain as well as the Omicron BA4 and BA5 subvariants. Abortion battles continue in the states after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. In North Carolina, a federal judge ruled a law banning abortion after 20 weeks can go into effect. The judge lifted an injunction on the ban, citing the high court's ruling giving states the right to regulate abortion. In South Carolina, the state Supreme Court temporarily blocked a ban on abortions after a heartbeat is detected. That law went into effect immediately after Roe v. Wade was overturned. The ruling puts the law on hold as other legal challenges go forward. Turning now overseas to a controversy involving Israel. Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas is walking back comments he made about the Holocaust. In a recent visit to Germany, Abbas was asked about the Palestinian attack on Jewish athletes at the Munich Olympics 50 years ago. His reply set off a firestorm in Germany and Israel. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
Abbas came to Germany on a state visit to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The two leaders agreed to work towards a peaceful solution in the Middle East. Afterward, a reporter asked the Palestinian Authority chairman if he would apologize to Israel and Germany ahead of the 50th anniversary of the Munich Olympics massacre. During the 1972 Summer Games, Palestinian terrorists took Israeli athletes and coaches hostage, murdering 11 of them and a German policeman. Abbas's answer led to outrage in Germany, Israel, and beyond.
Since 1947 and until today, Israel has committed 50 massacres in 50 Palestinian villages. 50 massacres, 50 Holocaust, and until now, every day. They were dead at the hands of the Israeli army. We are saying enough of this. Come to peace.
Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid called the comments a monstrous lie, tweeting, 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, including 1.5 million Jewish children. History will never forgive him. Defense Minister Benny Gantz, who met with Abbas recently over security issues, called his words despicable and false. The reprehensible and unfounded comparison between the Holocaust and the IDF is Holocaust denial. Those who seek peace are expected to acknowledge the past and not to distort reality and rewrite history. Abbas later partially walked back his comments in a statement, saying he had no intention of denying the Holocaust and calling it the most heinous crime in modern human history. Ephraim Zuroff, director of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, says people should not have been surprised.
Abu Mazen, after all, wrote a doctorate about Holocaust denial.
While Chancellor Scholz took flack for not immediately denouncing the remarks, he later tweeted in German and English, "I am disgusted by the outrageous remarks made by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. For us Germans in particular, any relativization of the singularity of the Holocaust is intolerable and unacceptable. I condemn any attempt to deny the crimes of the Holocaust."
Across the whole political spectrum in Germany, there was outrage, justifiably outrage. I mean, to say a thing like that in the Chancellery, in Berlin, where all this began, I mean, this is just unbelievable.
Despite the momentary outrage, Zuroff concedes business will likely go on as usual.
And the question is, what price will Abu Mazen pay? And I'm afraid he won't pay any price whatsoever. The EU will continue to send him millions of dollars. He'll continue to pay his terrorists. And it's as if nothing happened.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem. Jerusalem.
To you.
Thank you, Ephraim and Julie. Boy, you think of the boldness of Abbas in that moment in Berlin, standing next to the German chancellor to make that statement. As Julie mentioned, he's walking it back a bit, but if somebody wants that moment again, it is most likely the German chancellor for not taking him on directly in that moment. The firestorm ensued.